Okay, so I'm going to assume the audio is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Now, the paralegal profession has evolved. It's evolved since it was first created, and it will continue to evolve. So in today's webinar, we'll be talking about the past, how the paralegal profession was developed, and then we'll also be talking about some changes that have occurred in the paralegal profession, and then we'll talk about what the future may hold for the profession as a whole. So what we'll specifically cover: the history of the paralegal profession, educational requirements for paralegals, what that looks like now, and then what that may look like in the future, the societal impact of non-attorneys providing legal services directly to the public. We'll peek into the future. You know, a lot of times you'll hear, you can't really predict the future, and you'll hear people say, you really can't know what's going to come or happen in the future, but sometimes you can. And so we're going to peek into the future of what the paralegal profession as a whole may have in store, and learn ways to enhance your career so you can stay ahead, not just in pace with these changes, but stay ahead of these changes. So where did it all begin? Where did it all start? The paralegal profession, that actual role, was developed. Actually, it was developed by attorneys, really. It was created with the collaboration, the ABA, various bar associations. That was back in the 1960s. And the reason why it was developed was because there was certain segments of society that were not being represented. They were not receiving assistance from attorneys because they couldn't afford it. So the solution for that was to create this professional that can do some of the tasks that an attorney would do at a lower rate. So we had back and during that time where secretaries or people that were operating as secretaries or assistants to attorneys were trained to become paralegals. So when we talk about paralegal educational requirements, you'll see where this stems from as far as the educational requirements that are required for paralegals. So secretaries were trained to be paralegals. Then schools cropped up. Schools started where they started to actually have formal training available for those that wanted to become paralegals. Now, what this allowed was for attorneys to delegate work to paralegals and to bill their clients less. So this allowed them to actually now start to meet the needs of some of these populations that were not receiving assistance before because they couldn't afford it. So that's where it all started from. And I always say, and you'll often hear me say, if you take any of my webinars or classes, that the paralegal role is not really, it was not created to solve a legal problem. It was really created to solve a business problem. Attorneys solve legal problems. People go to attorneys to solve their legal problems. The paralegal role was not created to solve a legal problem, to be that person that provides legal assistance. Although paralegals know how to do that, and the job functions that they perform do solve these problems in essence, the paralegal role was really created to solve a business problem. The business problem was, for an attorney, how do I allow myself to meet the needs of these different segments of society without going broke? And so there came this role for the paralegals. First, they were trained in-house. Now, and then, as I previously mentioned, schools and training programs cropped up in order to offer formal training. So when we talk about paralegal educational requirements, this is why across the board you'll never see a standard requirement for paralegals. Some professions, you will see that there's a minimum level of a requirement that's necessary to even obtain, let's say, a certification or to even operate within that field. Paralegal is not the same. Paralegals can earn a certificate. There's really no formal education requirements that's required. They can actually be trained like it was when the profession was first created and the job was first created. They can be trained on the job. Someone can go into a law firm or a legal organization as a file clerk or a legal secretary or receptionist even, and be trained and then earn the title paralegal. Some fields that is not the case. Now, for paralegal educational requirements that do exist, there are certificates, which is different from certifications. A certificate is what is earned after a particular body of knowledge is completed. So there's certificates. Now those certificates can either be ABA, which is American Bar Association approved programs, and then there's those non-ABA approved programs. You also have paralegal associate's degrees, and you also have bachelor's degrees. Now there's also master's degrees as well. Now some employers will require a certain level. Now this is not, again, across the board for the profession as a whole, but some employers will require a certificate. Some employers will even require a certificate from an ABA approved program. And then you have some that require associate's degrees or bachelor's degrees, but there is no set standard for someone entering into the profession. Like you have some professions where, let's say for an attorney, and this is just an example, but this exists in other professions as well, like accounting, real estate, medical, where someone has to have a certain level of education to even be considered to be, let's say a CPA or a RN or these certain designations. And that's not the same for a paralegal. For an attorney has to have at least a bachelor's degree, because an attorney, and there are some places where an attorney can just sit for the bar and become an attorney. Very, very rare. I don't know if I've heard of any cases where that's happened. So as far as even entering into law school, that bachelor's degree is necessary to go to law school. And then again, I mentioned these other professions like CPAs and other industries where there's this minimum level of education that's required. So I talked about when the paralegal role was developed to solve this business problem, and it was to serve these underrepresented segments of society. Well, as time went on, there are still these underrepresented segments of society. You still have people complaining about attorneys' costs, that they're too expensive, and some people go without the assistance of attorney. Some will never deal with a legal issue because they don't have the funds to pay for an attorney. Others will handle legal issues themselves. So over time, what you had now were non-attorney legal service providers that filled in this gap that paralegals working under the direction of an attorney or supervised by an attorney did not fill, because this problem was not solved. So now you had another solution that came on board. So these non-attorney legal service providers are typically paralegals. These are paralegals that actually provide services directly to the public. They are not supervised by an attorney, or they don't have to be supervised by an attorney. So in some states they have this. They have this in California, Florida, just to name two, where people that are trained, professionals, legal professionals that are trained, typically they're paralegals that are legal document preparers. So they will prepare divorce documents. They will assist with evictions, and they will assist with bankruptcies and different other practice areas outside of giving legal advice. So these states, if a person is registered, and I know I live in California, we're one state that has this particular law that you have to meet a certain level of education and experience requirements. You file with in a county, the county that you're providing services to, you file with, and then you can assist those that do not have an attorney with various different things, lawsuits, child support, pretty much anything an attorney would do or provide the services in our practice area outside of giving legal advice. So this person would pretty much be acting in, pretty much like an administrative role, but providing the person with the court rules and filing the documents in line with those particular rules. So once the paralegal role was created to solve a problem, then the paralegal role really evolved, because these are typically the people that are providing these non-attorney legal services. Sometimes you will have some attorneys that have been disbarred, or some that are sitting, waiting to take the bar, or waiting to go to law school, that fill in these particular gaps or provide these services as non-attorney legal service providers. But for the most part, these are paralegals that are providing this particular service. Now, you'll hear a lot of cons and pros to this. The pros would be that it saves money. That's the benefit. That's the reason probably the most widely accepted or talked about reason why you have these non-attorney legal service providers, because they can offer legal services at a lower cost. So it saves money. Now, the cons to that, outside of the fact that these non-attorney legal service providers cannot give legal advice. So they can't instruct the client and tell the client, well, in your case, I think you should do this, or steer them a different direction. They can't give any legal advice, which is a con, because some clients, that's exactly what they need. But on top of that, you also have some individuals, and I mentioned that you have attorneys that have been disbarred. You have people that have attorneys that have broken ethical rules, that are now operating in these particular positions, and they're still operating as attorneys, really. But they don't have, they can't call themselves that, because they're not actually licensed any longer. So, though people in the public have to look out for individuals that are not providing the doing what's in their best interest. Also, you have some that still charge really high prices, and they're not attorneys, so they're really defeating the whole purpose of why the role was even created. So those are some of the cons. Now, I mentioned before why the paralegal role was developed, why then now you have non-attorney legal service providers. It all pretty much boils down to public demand. The public demand for legal assistance. Now, in criminal law, you can just look at it in a sense as in criminal law. In criminal law, when someone is charged, they have the right. It's actually a right. They have a right to an attorney. Now, this is not the same for other areas. If someone's dealing with a divorce, if someone's dealing with a bankruptcy, if someone is filing a lawsuit for whatever reason, there's no right to an attorney for that. But the issue may be just as serious or more serious than someone that is dealing with a criminal issue. So there are benefits. There's the public demand to want to be represented, to want to have expert legal advice to be able to handle these different issues. Because the public is always going to drive everything. When you think about whenever certain things are developed, there's a demand for the public for it. And there's also this public demand in the legal industry as well, which drives why certain things are done and handled the way that they are. You have the economic benefits, which is that public demand, that supply, that demand, the need for underrepresented populations to get the assistance they need. If someone's dealing with an immigration issue, if someone's dealing with a child issue, divorce issue, they want to have representation. And then also you have social advocacy. A lot of paralegals and a lot of people, of those that are not attorneys, actually are very active in different areas. Environmental law, just to name one. Domestic violence, immigration reform, bankruptcy reform. A lot of these different areas, you have paralegals that actually are in the forefront of some of these changes. And so the public demand for legal assistance drives the changes that occur in the legal marketplace. But the changing legal landscape is not always due to public demand. Sometimes it's due to other factors like technology. Technology actually has changed the legal landscape a lot. It has changed the way that services are provided. It has changed what is actually done in the legal field. When you think about, let's say, e-discovery, back, 20 years ago, you didn't even have this field that existed. You didn't even have an e-discovery. You had discovery. Discovery being that phase of a case where a person is collecting evidence, collecting information, getting evidence, going through stacks and stacks of paper. That was discovery. Now you have this whole separate area that's discovery, but it's just electronic evidence, dealing with electronic information. There's rule changes, court rule changes, rules of civil procedure, codes that have been enacted and amended just because of the changes of technology, just the way that we do things. So although these changes in the legal landscape and the rules and even professionals, because we have now e-discovery professionals. These are neither. Some can be paralegals or some can be attorneys. Some are neither. These are individuals, professionals that specifically deal with electronic evidence. So you have now this whole new role, again, that has cropped up in the legal field because of changes in society, not economic demands or the need to serve underrepresented segments of the society, but just due to technology advancements alone. So what can you do to prepare? So, because the purpose of this particular webinar is not just to talk about the history of the paralegal role and to go over it and let you know about it and inform you. The information is provided in order to get you to think, how might this impact me? How might this impact my career overall? How do I prepare for this so that I can stay in pace or actually stay ahead of these changes? The worst thing is to get somewhere and need something and not have it, or to need something in a particular area and not have it. Needing to have more technological skills and not have those skills. And then what I mean by that is there has been ethical rules that have been amended and actually created for attorneys specifically dealing with technology and their competency. So before, when you would hear about, an attorney being incompetent, not knowing about a particular area of law, not being versed in a particular area of law, their knowledge about pretty much the law. Now, incompetence actually includes the knowledge of technology as well. So if this is necessary for attorneys, it is not difficult. When I talked about the beginning, peeking into the future, And even when I touched on educational requirements, and there's a reason why I did that, is because if attorneys are being required to have technological competence, it is not difficult to peek into the future and to say that although paralegals at this point are not required to adhere to any ethical requirements, that law firms not only will require their paralegals that they hire, and even the ones that they currently have employed, to have a certificate or have a ABA approved certificate or have a certain level of education, a specific degree like a bachelor's degree, that they then may require their paralegals to demonstrate technological competence. So it's not really difficult to say that in the future, if you do not know about technology, and I'm not talking about knowing how to use LexisNexis and knowing how to use Westlaw and how to search on Google, but knowing, and I'll mention one area, cloud computing. Cloud computing, legal cloud computing is the use of pretty much the web for these different case management programs. So you may in the past have, familiarized yourself with how to use desktop versions of particular case management programs, Abacus Law, CaseMaker, Best Case. But with cloud computing, these particular law office management and these practice management systems now have online versions, or also called cloud versions. And with that usage, there are laws, or there are ethical rules that attorneys have to adhere to specific to the use of these particular types of systems. So it's not just enough to know how to use these particular systems, but if a firm is actually utilizing a cloud-based version of the system or any other one, they must know the rules specific to these cloud-based systems. Therefore, those that they employ, paralegals specifically, also must understand the ethical rules and requirements necessary to use these particular systems. So again, not just enough to put on a resume or when you're in an interview to demonstrate or express your knowledge of knowing how to use different systems. Do you know the laws? Do you know the ethical rules concerning their usage? Do you know that when cloud-based systems are used in certain jurisdictions, a client has to sign off on it. A client has to approve its usage. Do you know that? That's something important to know. So if you do client intakes, that's part of the process that's built into it. So again, it's not sometimes you can look into the future. You can predict the future. And with predicting that, you can say, let me learn about this. Don't just wait until you go apply for a job and you're turned away because you don't know this. Put yourself ahead of the curve and make yourself aware, because although it may not be a requirement in your field, being a paralegal field, it could be a requirement in your jurisdiction for the managing attorney that you work for, and that might start then being implemented to other staff members as well. So that's one way to prepare, and you can look into the future and see that could be a possibility. Elder law. There's a boom in elder law in fields that deal with the elderly, Social Security, Medicare, Medi-Cal. With that boom, will there also be other not laws, not laws, but maybe certain ethical requirements that are changed due to that. And what do I mean by that? There was something in the news years ago. It was this, I don't know if it was a law firm that was collecting debt or a collection agency. But this was in the news how, it was known that these collection agencies, agents, or whoever they were, attorneys or paralegals, or whoever was fulfilling this particular role, extremely rude. I think it was an elderly person. I mean, it was ridiculous because it was in the news how they treated this particular person. And it came in the news. Well, if that came in the news and there was such backlash, there's no rules to that. There's no, there are certain rules about how, talking to, following up with clients and returning phone calls as far as the client relations aspect. But, some people are just rude. There's no really rules to that. But with this growing segment of society that are now going to be dealing with certain issues, Social Security, Medicare, even estate planning and those things that affect individuals as they age, they will be utilizing the services of law firms more. So if the same bad, and I'm going to say bad, okay, so if someone gets mad, I use the word, this bedside, I'm going to call it bedside behavior, is still used where, it's known, and, it's known that sometimes attorneys can just be really abrupt and, the way that they treat, they're not calling clients back, they're treating them certain ways. This may not be acceptable to the point where rules start to change to deal with it, because now you have a larger group. I talked about economics and supply and demand and the paralegal role being created because of the need to serve certain segments of society. Then the creation of the non-attorney service providers, specifically what they're called legal document assistance preparers, or in Washington, which I'll talk about. So when I recap, Washington, they have legal specialists there. They're not called legal document preparers, and they actually can give some legal advice in Washington. So this demand from the public to be served actually resulted in changes in the industry overall. So if this demand can implement and actually result in the creation of, one, the paralegal role, two, these non-attorney service providers, it's not difficult to foresee that now with this larger segment of society that are dealing with, you going to be going to attorneys for these different legal issues, because you have this baby boomer group that's growing huge now, huge segment of society, that this demand from them to be respected in their elder years as they're dealing with these different issues will then drive the change to ethical rules concerning, and I'm going to use bedside manner for lack of better words, but change the ethical rules to require attorneys to handle their clients differently than they have in the past. That being said, that's going to trickle over to paralegals as well. So how do you prepare for something like that? One, know what the current rules are regarding client relations that attorneys have, because again, paralegals, may belong to paralegal associations or bar associations, but they don't have to. They don't have to. Attorneys, and so they don't have these ethical rules that they must adhere to. Attorneys must adhere to these rules. So it behooves you to know what these rules are that attorneys must adhere to dealing with client relations, the current rules. Dealing with client relations so that you can start getting in the same frame of mind as an attorney. So then when these rules roll out to deal with other issues, you'll already be in the mindset that although I'm not an attorney, I still must conduct myself in the same manner that they do when I'm dealing with clients. Intellectual property. Preparing yourself for that, one way, intellectual property is huge now, and there are certain countries, like I know China has a lot of intellectual property there, issues that they deal with, and you may work with foreign nations, foreign governments, when you're dealing with intellectual property. And as technology expands and changes, that might be more commonplace to do that. So putting yourself in the mindset of not only knowing the jurisdiction rules of your state and the United States, but what are those UN? There's UN, you have these treaties, you have these international agencies that deal with intellectual property. So then starting to train yourself to look and view things globally when researching certain laws, or even just knowing what's out there dealing with intellectual property with certain laws. Because why does that matter, you may ask? Well, in the future, because technology has really proliferated in every area, and intellectual property will just become more and more prevalent. It may be more commonplace to deal with foreign nations when you're working in that particular practice area. So then you may have to start learning, when you do legal research and you're pulling up rules and codes, not just to look within your particular jurisdiction or within the United States, to learn, well, where do I look? Where do I look for international laws dealing with A, B, C, and D? Do you know how to do that now? So if you know how to do that now, you know where to look, you know what exists for that. When that then becomes something that you have to do as part of your job, you know where to go, you know where to look. You're not someone that is behind the curve. You may have been great in intellectual property during a certain time, but then when it becomes commonplace to work with foreign entities, foreign governments, foreign court rules, foreign and international, these treaties, you don't get sidetracked where you don't even know what to do any longer. You don't even know your research that used to be superb is now really subpar because you don't even really know, you don't know how to research that. And then with e-discovery, dealing with electronics, just preparing by knowing more about technology. And knowing about technology is not just knowing how to use a specific system. Technology is learning about certain terminology. Like in the legal field, there's certain terminology. And that's why not a lot, because I can't cite the statistics for it, but there are some e-discovery professionals that have no legal background, but they have a lot of technological background. They know the language of technology. So there's this other whole field, this IT field, that goes untouched a lot of times by legal professionals because they leave it to those others. But in the future, that might not be so easy to do. So learning about technology, and not just about how a system works, but the terminology and the usage and how technology interacts with devices. Now, before I open it up for questions, I want to recap on what we discussed. We first started off by talking about the past, how the paralegal profession, that job, that role was actually developed. And then we talked about the economic benefits. We also talked about the drive, like supply and demand. There's this demand from the public to be represented, and there was not enough attorneys who, one, could economically provide that service, or two, who were not willing to. So now you had this development of this role, this profession that filled in this gap. Well, then time went on, and there's still this segment of society that's not being served. So then now you have this paralegal role that then kind of morphed into these non-attorney service providers providing services specifically to the public. I mentioned California having legal document preparers that pretty much act in these administrative type roles to, type up documents, make sure that these documents adhere to the specific rules of the jurisdiction. Now, Washington, and they cannot give legal advice. Washington, their non-attorney service providers there that provide services directly to the public, not under the supervision of an attorney, can actually give some limited license professionals. And I know I have that title wrong, but they're, the title pretty much describes what they do. They provide a limited amount of legal assistance directly to the public. And this again came from this need from the public to be represented in certain practice areas, family law to name one. So in Washington, these particular individuals that meet these educational requirements, which typically are paralegals, can actually give legal advice. They can give some legal advice there. In some of these other states that have these non-attorney service providers that are typically paralegals, they cannot give any legal advice at all. But in Washington, that role for the non-attorney service providers actually can provide a limited amount of legal advice. Now, after these non-attorney service providers were created, you then see other changes in the legal industry as well, and that have impacted the way in which law is practiced overall, how law is and legal services are provided by the demand from the public, from these different reasons, societal reasons, these underrepresented segments of society, economic reasons, the need for cost-effective legal services, and then you have these educational requirements now being implemented for these particular individuals, those that act as non-attorney service providers, have to meet certain educational requirements. So in the future, I mentioned some areas in the future that might be impacted, e-discovery, the competence, technology competence, also rules regarding how attorneys as well as their staff interact with clients, because this huge segment of society's baby boomers, needing more legal services. And with this, the change may come where the requirements for attorneys to actually interact with their clients in a different manner. And also these educational requirements dealing with what is a minimum level for a paralegal to even have. If you have these non-attorney service providers that have to have these minimum level educational requirements, as rules change, as technology continues to change, and as attorneys understand the need for staff that don't just understand how to use systems, but also understand the rules concerning its usage, and I mentioned cloud computing, will there then be a certain minimum level of educational requirements, because an attorney will then know if a paralegal has this specific level of education, they know that they have learned A, B, C, and D. Let's say when I talked about client relations, any paralegal school is going to teach you how to research. They're going to have a course on legal research. Attorney will require, some that do, their paralegals, to have a certain level of education, a certificate, non-ABA, ABA certificates, associate's degree, bachelor's degree because they know that that paralegal is going to at least know legal research. So with the technological advancements and with if this occurs with these different requirements with client relations, an attorney does not have to guess if their staff, if this paralegal knows about the technology competence. They know for sure that they have learned about this in their program. Okay, so and just to recap and go further on from there, we then talked about the way that you can prepare for the future. Because as you've seen, the paralegal role has changed. It's developed over time. It's going to continue to change. So how do you prepare? And I provided some ways in which you can do that and prepare for these particular changes that if they're not those specific changes that I mentioned, there will be change. You know, as the saying goes, there's nothing constant in life but change itself. Things will change. Rules will change. How do you prepare yourself? How do you put yourself in the mindset where you are always prepared for a change and it doesn't take you by surprise, or it doesn't take you from catch you at this point where you're not ready to deal with it, or you're not ready to handle it, but that you are able to see it as an opportunity to expand your skills, to expand your knowledge base, to make yourself more of an asset to the firm that you work for. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this particular session up. I'm going to open it up for any questions or comments that you have. On this slide now on the screen, you should see the slide where it has contact information from Rainmakers Legal Education, our phone number, 800-580-6068. Also email address, info@rainmakersonline.com. You can also go to the website, rainmakersonline.com, and on the bottom right, there is a contact button, and on that contact button, you can reach out that way as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up for any questions that you might have, so you can type those in the chat box, and I will give those, get those questions answered for you. If I don't have the answer right now, then I will look for it, and I'll send it to you afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up